Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room was alive with chatter, boots dragging against steel floors, helmets clattering onto lockers. Yet where she stood, silent, careful, helmet cradled under one arm, it was as if she didn't exist. She was the probationary one, a trainee, a placeholder until someone better filled the seat. Lieutenant didn't flinch. She didn't need to. She had already grown used to this particular kind of silence, the kind that disguised itself as laughter just out of reach, the kind that pressed in from the edges of a room but never spoke to her face. It was quieter than open contempt, but sharper in its sting. She lowered her gaze to the gloves in her bag. One finger slid into the cuff, pulling it straight. Her breathing was steady, deliberate. Every motion slow enough to be precise, fast enough to be efficient. The gloves folded once, then again, tucked neatly into the side pouch. The visor of her helmet caught a beam of light leaking through the hangar shutters. Dust drifted across it like particles suspended in time. Around her, the squadron played its games. Captain Brooks was the loudest voice in the room, a man who believed his charm was as important as his flying. He leaned against a console with his arms crossed, smirk pulling at one corner of his mouth. 30 hours, he said, as if repeating the words could make them heavier. He raised 3 fingers. That's it. 30 recorded hours in a cockpit and they dump her in our squadron. Guess command is checking boxes now. His wingman snorted. Maybe she's connected. General's niece, politician's daughter, they send them to bases like this sometimes. Make 'em feel like soldiers. Brooks chuckled. Or she's here to make us look good when she flunks out before week's end. The laughter rose, not loud but sharp enough that heard every word. She didn't respond, didn't even lift her head. She adjusted the oxygen tube connection on her helmet, tracing it with her fingertips without needing to look. That silence made them laugh harder. To them, it was weakness. In the far corner, Cadet Tran sat hunched over his console, eyes flicking from the group to her. He didn't join the laughter. At 22, he was still new himself, still figuring out what mattered. He had seen men like this before, the quiet ones. The ones who carried themselves differently, who didn't bother proving anything. But even he couldn't quite place it. There was something about her, something unfinished. The pre-flight bell cut through the room. Helmets clicked shut, suits zipped up, boots falling into step. Slid her arms through her flight suit with quick efficiency, fastening seals around her wrists and collar. She moved as though she had done it thousands of times. No wasted gestures. No second checks. And then it happened. Her sleeve shifted as she reached for her harness strap. For half a second her forearm caught the light. The faded black ink, worn by time, curled just beneath her skin, 3 letters wrapped in the arc of a winged lightning bolt. Froze, his breath caught before he could hide it. He had seen that mark before. Not in person, not anywhere official, but in whispers. In the grainy black and white photos that surfaced in late-night exchanges between recruits, too blurry to confirm, too dangerous to question. Storm Rider, he muttered under his breath. One of the cadets caught him staring. What's he, a bug or something? Swallowed hard. Nothing, just thought I saw, he stopped. His throat locked on the words because it wasn't nothing, it was everything. By the time the squad filed into the simulator bay, the whispers had already started. One cadet nudged another, half joking, half curious. Storm Rider, huh? Old myth, someone whispered back. Supposed to be some Black Ops squad from way back. Ghost pilots, most didn't make it home. Brooks overheard and scoffed loudly, his voice carrying across the dome. Fairy tale-ese. Trust me, rookies with 30 hours don't fly secret strike missions. You kids watch too many movies. No one challenged him, not directly, but something in the room had shifted like static before a lightning strike. The dome swallowed them whole, lights dimming to black as the projection screens bled alive with sky. Slid into her pod without hesitation, her visor lowering over her eyes. For the first time that day, her breathing slowed. Her heartbeat found its rhythm. Countdown lights flickered across her console. 5, 4. Brooks's voice carried faintly over the comms, sneering even now. Try not to crash, rookie. Wouldn't want your obituary to be during a training sim. 3, 2. She placed her hands on the controls, fingers feather-light, poised. 1. The horizon erupted in fire. Missiles screeched through the simulated sky, radar pings lighting up in bursts, voices shouting over comms. Within seconds, Brooks and his wingmen boxed her squadron into a dead-end kill zone. Rookies folding already, Brooks laughed, his voice echoing. Told you, shortest sim of her career. And then her voice cut across the channel. Calm, low, absolute. Delta formation, drop 75 feet, now. Her teammates hesitated. Brooks had been their loudest voice for weeks. She was nothing more than a probationary transfer, but something in her tone rooted them to the moment. They obeyed. Yanked her fighter into a spiral dive, her vector flipping at an angle the AI screamed was impossible. Warning lights blinked red across her screen. She didn't flinch, didn't slow, didn't even blink. The maneuver tore through Brooks's formation like a blade through silk, unraveling their lock in 8 seconds flat. His breath hitched, no way. By the 4th minute, the battle had reversed. Brooks's squad was wiped clean from the sky. Silence filled the comms, silence heavier than any insult. In the observation deck, instructors exchanged glances. One name appeared at the top of the, etched in white against the black screen. CALLAHAN first. Colonel Shaw, head of tactical operations, leaned forward in his chair. His knuckles whitened against the console. He hadn't heard that name in years. His eyes locked on the faint tattoo visible on the projection feed. A whisper escaped his lips before anyone else could speak. Storm Rider 1. The operator beside him froze. Shaw straightened. Get me the ready room now. And just like that, the room shifted. The smirks vanished. The whispers turned hollow. A name thought long buried had surfaced again, not in rumor, but in the unshaken hands of a probationary pilot who had just rewritten the rules. The squad filed back into the ready room. The silence this time was different, heavy, expectant. Even Brooks's packing couldn't mask the weight of it. His boots struck the floor with too much force, his voice louder than necessary. Lucky break, he snapped, slamming his flight tablet against the console. That's all it was, a glitch in the sim. No one answered. Sat stiff, pulse pounding in his ears. He whispered the words again, soft but undeniable. Storm Rider. The steel doors hissed open. Colonel Shaw stepped inside. He didn't walk so much as command the space around him. His gaze swept the room, locked on, and for the first time in years, in front of everyone, the colonel raised his hand in a salute. The recruits froze. Brooks stared, his smirk collapsing into disbelief. Hesitated, then returned the gesture. Precise, perfect. Shaw's voice cut the silence in two. You flew that maneuver. Inverted spiral dive, vector flip at 35 degrees. Where did you learn it? Her eyes held steady. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Raven Rock. The name dropped like a hammer. The room's air shifted again. Brooks frowned, muttered, That's classified. Shaw didn't let him finish. Exactly. His gaze fell to the tattoo under her sleeve. He didn't need to see the whole thing, he already knew. Storm Rider, he said softly. The room seemed to inhale as one. For the first time, every eye turned toward the probationary pilot, the placeholder, the one they dismissed. She stood calm, helmet tucked under one arm, expression unreadable. And though no one dared speak, a silent truth hung heavier than any order. The sky had remembered her name. What did it mean when a colonel saluted a probationary pilot? The ready room was frozen. No one dared move, not even to breathe too loudly. Stood still, visor tucked beneath her arm, eyes steady. The salute lingered between her and Colonel Shaw like a suspended verdict. When she lowered her hand, the silence grew louder. Brooks's jaw clenched, his shoulders stiff as if trying to reject what he'd just witnessed. But the colonel wasn't looking at him. He wasn't looking at anyone else. His eyes stayed locked on. "You didn't just survive that drill," Shaw said, voice low but cutting. "You inverted the vector at 35 degrees in a spiral dive. That maneuver doesn't exist in the simulator's playbook. Where did you learn it?" Raven Rock answered. Her voice carried no bravado, no need for explanation, just two words. The recruits shifted in their seats, restless, confused. Raven Rock wasn't something you asked about. Everyone knew that. It was the kind of name whispered once, then forgotten, like a place that didn't exist on any map. Brooks scoffed, breaking the tension like a man throwing a stone into still water. "Raven Rock, that's classified, she's bluffing. There's no way." "Enough!" Shaw's voice cracked through the air, sharp as a rifle shot. He turned to Brooks, his gaze hard. "You will find no public records, Captain, and you don't need them." Brooks shut his mouth, but his fists tightened at his sides. The colonel faced again. His gaze dipped once to the faint ink beneath her sleeve. He didn't need to see the whole mark. The ghost of it was enough. "Storm Rider," he murmured. The word rippled through the room like a tremor. Eyes darted. Breath quickened. Tran's chest thumped like a drum inside his ribs. He had guessed, but hearing it spoken aloud, it was different. It was real. Brooks blinked, confused and angry. "Storm Rider, what the hell is that supposed to be? Some drone program, experimental sims?" This time, Shaw turned fully toward the squadron, his presence towering even without raising his voice. "Storm Rider wasn't a program," he said. "It was a classified strike unit. 7 pilots, hand-picked. Missions so far off the books most Pentagon officials didn't even know they existed." His eyes moved across the room, letting the words settle like stones. "One mistake and wars would have begun. 5 didn't come home. 2 disappeared." He paused. The weight of memory darkened his expression. "And 1 survived." Every eye shifted back to. She didn't move, didn't blink. The silence inside her was a fortress, impenetrable. Whispered it barely audible, "She's Storm Rider 1. Shaw didn't confirm. He didn't have to. The room already knew. Brooks's face twisted, searching for words, for something to hold on to. But nothing came. Slid her gloves into her belt, her gaze steady on the colonel. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "I didn't come here for recognition, and I didn't come here to prove anything." The words floated through the air, not sharp, not defiant, simply true. "I came here," she continued, "to make sure none of you end up on the wrong side of a report they'll never let your families read." It silenced them more effectively than Shaw ever could, because it wasn't threat. It wasn't pride. It was reality, spoken without raising her tone. Shaw nodded once, like he'd been waiting for her to say it. Then he turned to the room at large. His words became order. "Effective immediately, training protocols change. When Lieutenant speaks, you listen. That is not a suggestion. That is survival." He pivoted sharply, boots echoing on the steel floor, and strode out without another word. The heavy door hissed closed behind him. For a moment, no one moved. The room had changed shape in seconds, as though the air itself had been replaced. Brooks opened his mouth once, then shut it. His arrogance was gone, hollowed out by something he couldn't name. Stared at, heart pounding. She placed her helmet gently into her locker, movements calm, precise, the same as before, as though nothing had changed, but everything had. That night the base carried the rumor like wildfire. Storm Rider. Some called it myth, some called it ghost, but no one said probationary again. The next day, silence greeted where laughter once had. Recruits parted in the hallway, their glances sharp but cautious, unsure of how to face her. She walked as she always had, head level, steps even, no urgency in her movements. If she noticed their stares, she didn't acknowledge them. In the hangar, Brooks stood stiff at his station. His eyes flicked toward her, then away. The swagger was gone. Approached her cautiously after drills, his voice quiet. "Ma'am, that tattoo. It really is," he hesitated, unsure if asking was stepping into fire. Her expression didn't change. She met his gaze just long enough to steady him, then looked past him to the desert sky beyond the hangar doors. "Some things are heavier when carried out loud," she said. "Best to let silence do the work." Swallowed nodded and said nothing more. The base was restless in the days that followed. The Pentagon's silence only made the whispers louder. Everyone knew something had shifted, something bigger than their training cycles. The squadron carried a new weight, like they were standing in the shadow of something none of them could fully see. One evening the order came: assemble, no exceptions. The sun was sinking, the desert bleeding gold and fire across the horizon. Inside Hangar 4, rows of pilots stood shoulder to shoulder, helmets tucked beneath arms, boots aligned. No one spoke. No one dared. At the front, Colonel Shaw waited beneath the towering flag, his presence steady as stone. To his right stood the base commander and two officials in dress uniforms, ribbons catching the light. And at the center stood, calm, quiet, unshaken. The colonel stepped forward, boots striking the steel with weight. His voice cut through the silence. "Storm Rider," he said. The word hit like thunder, settling over the formation. "Most of you don't know what that means," Shaw continued. "You weren't supposed to, that was by design." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. He let it settle before speaking again. 15 years ago, there were missions you'll never read about. Missions so far off the books they didn't exist to anyone but the 7 pilots sent to fly them. They didn't volunteer. They were chosen, hand-picked, because they were the best, because they were trusted when failure wasn't an option. The colonel's eyes lowered briefly, heavy with memory. 5 of them didn't make it home. 2 vanished. He turned toward, and 1 walked into this hangar last week. A silence followed that no one dared break. The base commander stepped forward, a sealed folder in his hands. "When the Pentagon called me 3 nights ago, I thought it was a mistake, a file misread, but the truth is right here." He extended it toward. "You saved lives more than we'll ever be able to count, and that is not classified." She hesitated, then accepted it. Her grip was steady, her expression unreadable. From the back of the formation, boots scraped against steel. Brooks, his posture rigid, his face pale. He moved forward, every step a weight. For the first time since she arrived, his eyes carried no arrogance, no defiance, only shame. He stopped before her. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand in a crisp salute. The hangar held its breath. Paused, then returned it, precise, perfect. One by one, the others followed. Dozens of salutes snapping into the air like thunderclaps, not for a probationary pilot, not for a legend, but for the woman who had carried the silence of ghosts and still walked forward. For the first time, stood at the center of the room, not because she demanded it, not because she needed it, but because truth had finally caught up to her name. "Storm Rider 1, Shaw said firmly. "Welcome back." Her face didn't break. No smile, no pride, only a nod, steady and silent. Later, after the hangar emptied, she sat alone on a workbench, the folder unopened in her hands. Her tattoo caught the dim light, the faded ink a reminder she could never erase. She traced it with her thumb once, slowly. Outside, the runway lights burned like stars against the desert night. Engines hummed in the distance, preparing for another round of drills. She stood, set the folder gently aside, and reached for her helmet. Tomorrow she would fly again, not as probationary, not as forgotten, but as Storm Rider 1, the last of her kind, carrying ghosts no one else would know. And the base would remember. Because respect isn't given, and it isn't asked for. Sometimes it's carried in silence. How do you measure trust after years of silence? The base had shifted since that night in Hangar 4. Whispers had dulled into watchfulness. Pilots still glanced her way, but not with mockery now, with calculation, with the unease of men realizing they had been standing beside a ghost all along. Lieutenant moved as she always had, calm, silent, but something deeper ran beneath her stillness now, like undercurrents dragging in the dark. She carried the new weight without complaint, and the others carried their unease in return. Colonel Shaw wasted no time. The morning after the ceremony, he called her into his office. The blinds were drawn tight, the desert sun reduced to thin slices of light across his desk. The folder she had been given the night before lay unopened in her hands. "Set it down," Shaw said. His tone was sharp but not unkind. "That file is nothing you don't already know. Ghosts on paper don't matter. What does matter is whether you're ready to fly again." Place the folder on the desk. Her fingers lingered for a moment, then she met his gaze evenly. "I never stopped being ready." Shaw leaned back in his chair, studying her. His silence stretched long enough for the hum of the air vent to fill the space. Finally, he spoke. "You've been gone a long time. Most of these kids weren't even in high school when Storm Rider vanished. They won't follow you just because of a name. They'll follow if you prove the sky still belongs to you." "I don't need them to follow me," said quietly. "I just need them to survive." Shaw's expression flickered, just enough to show he'd heard something he hadn't expected. He nodded once, decisive. "Then you'll get your chance." The orders came that afternoon. A live mission. No more simulations, no more drills. Real coordinates, real stakes. Whispers spread across like wildfire. The details were sparse, classified beyond even the instructors, but the shape of it was clear. A reconnaissance run deep into contested airspace, gathering intel on a weapons convoy moving under heavy escort. Risky, but not unprecedented. Brooks was the first to voice what everyone else thought. He caught outside the hangar, his jaw tight, his voice low but edged with resentment. "They're sending you out on this," he asked. "After one simulation, after 15 years off the grid, you're going to lead us into live fire." Didn't break stride. She walked past him, her steps steady, helmet tucked beneath her arm. He followed. "You think a tattoo makes you untouchable. That one lucky maneuver means you're suddenly." She stopped so abruptly he almost ran into her. She turned her head just enough that he caught the edge of her gaze. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "I don't need you to trust me, Captain. I need you to fly your jet and make it back alive. Can you do that?" Brooks froze. For the first time he had no words. She left him standing in the corridor. Tran caught up to her a few minutes later, nervous energy radiating off him. His helmet bounced against his side as he jogged to match her pace. "Ma'am," he said, breathless, "is it true? The mission, they're really sending us into hostile airspace?" Her expression didn't change. "Yes." "Swallowed, and you're leading it." She glanced at him then, her eyes steady, unblinking. "Would that bother you?" He hesitated, then shook his head quickly. "No, no, ma'am, just I trust you." For the first time her eyes softened, just barely. She didn't smile, but the weight in her gaze lifted for a breath. "Then stay close," she said. The squadron gathered in the hangar at dusk. Engines roared as ground crews prepped fighters under the fading light. The desert sky burned red and gold, streaks of cloud catching the last fire of day. Shaw stood at the front, his voice cutting through the roar. "This is not a drill. You will fly as a unit. You will follow orders, and you will come home." His eyes shifted to, "Lieutenant will lead." Brooks's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The others exchanged glances, some uncertain, some quietly relieved. Gripped his helmet, heart hammering. Didn't speak. She didn't need to. She moved down the line, inspecting her team, her silence heavier than any speech. When she reached her jet, she paused, one hand resting on the cold metal fuselage. Her eyes closed briefly. For an instant, the weight of memory threatened to break through the faces of the other 6, the ones who hadn't come back. She inhaled once, exhaled, and climbed into the cockpit. The engines roared to life. One by one, the fighters rolled onto the runway, lights blazing against the night. The comms clicked on, voices checking in. Brooks's tone was clipped, nervous, the rest steady but tense. His voice was the last to come through, calm, level. Storm flight, this is 1, wheels up in 10, follow formation, stay sharp. The countdown began, engines screamed, the night swallowed them whole. The desert fell away beneath them, the lights of shrinking into stars on the horizon. Above, the sky opened wide and black, a canvas of silence. The mission had begun. The first stretch was uneventful. Empty air, radar quiet, only the hum of engines and the faint chatter of systems checks. But unease sat heavy in every cockpit. This wasn't simulation anymore. Every blip on the screen could be life or death. His breathing was loud in his headset. He tried to slow it, but his nerves betrayed him. His voice came across the channel, calm, grounding. "Tran, tighten your vector, you're drifting." He corrected immediately, "Yes, ma'am." Brooks's voice followed, dripping with tension. "What's the plan when they spot us? You gonna pull another miracle maneuver out of your sleeve?" "Fly the plan," replied. Her tone was unshaken. Radar pinged. A single blip, then another. Convoy escort, high altitude. "Contact 11 o'clock, said voice tight. "Copy," answered. "Storm flight, hold pattern, stay low." The squadron dipped, engines throttling back, hugging the dark. The escorts passed above, oblivious. The silence afterward was suffocating, heavier with each second. Then the convoy appeared on sensors. Dozens of vehicles, armored, escorted by more fighters than expected. Brooks hissed into the comm, "They didn't tell us about this." "They never do," said quietly. "Abort?" one of the pilots asked. "Negative," replied. Her voice was steady, but her grip on the controls tightened. "We're here, we finish." The plan was simple, too simple maybe. Gather visuals, mark coordinates, avoid engagement. But the sky doesn't always honor plans. One of the convoy escorts dipped lower, scanning. Its radar sweep brushed their position. His heart stopped. "They see us," he whispered. "Not yet," said, her voice cut through his panic. "Hold steady." The escort veered back up, past, silence again. Let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His hands shook. And then Brooks's voice snapped over comms. "We should take them, right now. We have the numbers." "No," said immediately. "We're not here to start a war." Brooks bristled. "We'll never get another chance." "Stand down, Captain." Her tone sharpened for the first time, a blade through steel. The channel went silent. They marked the convoy, recorded the visuals. The mission was almost over. Almost. Until a second radar sweep locked on. This one wasn't passing. It was hunting. "Missile lock," a voice shouted. The sky exploded. Flare trails streaked against black, alarms shrieking inside cockpits. Fighters screamed into evasive maneuvers, the convoy now fully alerted. Chaos broke open across the comms. "Evasive, evasive." His voice cut through like thunder, calm, clear, commanding. "Storm flight, Delta split now. Brooks, cover right, Tran on me." Engines roared, the squadron scattered. Missiles tore past, exploding into empty air. His hands shook against the controls, sweat dripping into his eyes. "I can't." "You can," his voice steadied him. "Stay with me." Another missile screamed. His jet flipped hard, diving beneath the escort's angle, her vector snapping into a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible. Followed by instinct more than skill, his breath ragged, his vision narrowing. The missile tore past them, missing by meters. On the channel, Brooks cursed, his jet caught in a dogfight with two escorts. "I'm boxed in." "Break left," ordered, "now." He hesitated. For a second pride warred with instinct, then he obeyed, and the path cleared. By the time the last missile streaked into empty sky, the squadron was alive. Shaken, breathing hard, but alive. "Storm flight, regroup," said. Her voice was calm again, as though the chaos hadn't touched her. "We're done here, homebound." No one argued. The desert lights returned on the horizon. The runway glowed like salvation. One by one, the fighters touched down, wheels shrieking against steel. Engines wound down. The silence afterward was heavier than battle. Inside her cockpit, sat still for a long moment, her hands resting on the controls. Her eyes closed. A breath, a memory, the faces of 6 ghosts. She exhaled slowly, unstrapped, and climbed down. The others were waiting, eyes wide, faces pale. Brooks stood off to the side, his jaw tight. He didn't speak. Not yet. Approached, his helmet clutched against his chest, his voice shaky but certain. "Ma'am, we wouldn't have made it without you." Didn't answer. She just walked past him, her silence saying more than words ever could. Because this was only the beginning. What happens when survival feels like failure? The hangar smelled of fuel and burnt metal long after the jets had cooled. Pilots moved in silence, every face pale from the night's brush with fire. They were alive, yes, but alive wasn't always enough. The debriefing was brutal. Colonel Shaw's voice was sharp, his questions cutting into every hesitation, every second of delay. He demanded playback from each cockpit, dissecting maneuvers, timing, even breathing patterns. No one left unscathed. And yet, when footage appeared on the big screen, the room went still. Her vector dives, her impossible flips, the way she guided Transjet through fire as though dragging him out by sheer force of will, it was undeniable. Even Brooks, arms crossed and jaw tight, couldn't mask what he had seen. But Shaw didn't smile. He didn't nod. His expression was as hard as steel. "You survived because she led," he said finally, his gaze sweeping the room. "Not because you were ready, remember that." The recruits shifted uncomfortably. Sat silent at the back, her helmet resting against her knee, eyes lowered. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. After the debrief, the squadron filed out in uneasy clusters, their voices hushed. Brooks lingered near the doorway, his face caught between pride and something else, shame maybe. When walked past, he opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words wouldn't come. Found her outside, where the desert wind carried the faint smell of jet fuel into the night. He jogged to catch her pace, his voice low. "You saved us," he said. "I mean, we were dead without you." She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, the faint glow of runway lights stretching into darkness. "You weren't dead," she said softly. "Not yet." Frowned, "But if you hadn't." "Tran," her voice cut him off, firm but not harsh. She turned to meet his gaze, and for a moment he saw something behind her calm, a shadow, heavy and unshaken. "Don't thank me, just learn." He nodded quickly, chastened, but his respect only grew. 2 days later, Pentagon brass arrived. The convoy mission had been filed under routine reconnaissance, but word traveled faster than files. Too many escorts, too much fire, too many questions about how a probationary pilot had walked an entire squadron back alive. They came in pressed uniforms, faces sharp with politics, their boots polished enough to catch reflections. They didn't speak to the recruits. They didn't need to. Their presence was a message. This wasn't just concern anymore. Colonel Shaw met them in the command wing, was called in last. She stepped into the room with the same quiet composure she always carried, her flight suit crisp, her hands still. The officials turned their eyes on her like searchlights. "Lieutenant," one of them said, his voice clipped, East Coast accent sharpened by years of boardrooms. "Explain how you executed a maneuver outside the simulator's programmed parameters." Her reply was steady. "I didn't execute it outside parameters. I executed it within possibilities." "Possibilities the AI doesn't recognize," another cut in. "That vector flip is physically unregistered in system data. Where did you learn it?" Hesitated, not from fear but from choice. Then, Raven Rock. The room shifted, chairs creaked, pens stilled. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one official cleared his throat. "Raven Rock doesn't exist." Her eyes held steady. "Exactly." Shaw almost smiled at that, but the moment passed too quickly. The officials scribbled notes, exchanged glances. They didn't press further, not yet. But their silence said more than words. This wasn't over. When left the room, she passed Brooks in the hallway. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his swagger was gone. He looked at her like a man watching the ground crack beneath him. "You think you're untouchable now," he muttered. She stopped, turned her head slightly. "Untouchable pilots don't bury five of their own." The words landed like a blow. His face hardened, but he didn't reply. She walked on, leaving him alone in the corridor with his silence. That night sat in the dim glow of the hangar long after the others had left. The folder lay unopened beside her again, its weight heavier than steel. She didn't need to read it. She carried every word inside her already, every call sign, every face, every unfinished sentence. The ghosts came quietly, they always did. The 7 of them lined in her memory like shadows against fire. 5 gone, 2 vanished. She had stopped asking if they were alive. Some answers were heavier than ignorance. Her thumb brushed the ink on her arm. The tattoo was faded now, but the memory of it burned fresh every time she touched it. Storm Rider 1, last of her kind. The sound of boots startled her. She turned to find, hesitant, hovering just inside the doorway. "Ma'am," he asked softly, you shouldn't be here alone." She raised a brow but said nothing. He stepped closer, awkward but earnest. "I know I don't understand what Storm Rider means. Not really, but I think," he faltered, searching for words, "I think you're still carrying them, all of them, every time you fly." For a moment her face softened. Her eyes lowered to the tattoo, then back to him. "You're young," she said quietly. "One day you'll learn the difference between carrying someone and being weighed down by them." He swallowed. "And which are you?" She didn't answer. She stood, picked up her helmet, and walked past him into the night. Stood alone, the silence pressing on him heavier than any answer. The next morning, orders came again. A new mission, different target, different stakes. This time the squadron would not be alone. Other units would join, but the eyes on them would be sharper now, not just but from Washington. Brooks stared at the briefing screen, his jaw tight, his pride cracked open but not gone. He glanced at once, then away, as if unable to reconcile the woman beside him with the legend her ink carried. Sat, his chest tight with anticipation and dread. His respect for her was growing into something else, something heavier, almost reverent. And she stood still, her face unreadable, her silence louder than Shaw's orders. Because she knew something none of them did. Storms don't end when the sky clears. Sometimes they're just waiting to return. What happens when the people watching want you to fail? The briefing room was fuller than usual, not just pilots and technicians this time. At the back wall, in pressed uniforms with clipped expressions, Pentagon officials observed in silence. Their pens poised, their eyes sharp. They didn't need to speak, their presence said enough. The projection screen glowed with maps and coordinates. Colonel Shaw stood at the podium, voice firm. "Target is a fortified radar station across the border. Intelligence suggests it's guiding long-range weapons convoys. Neutralizing it will cripple their supply lines." The words hung in the air. The mission wasn't surveillance this time. It was destruction. A murmur spread across the squadron. Brooks's voice cut through, low and skeptical. "That's not recon. That's an act of war." Shaw's eyes snapped to him. "That's an order." Brooks fell silent, but his jaw tightened. The colonel continued. "Storm Flight will lead the strike. Additional units will provide support. Timing is critical. Failure to coordinate will result in casualties." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. You follow her exactly." The officials at the back scribbled notes. Some exchanged glances, felt their eyes press against her skin like heat. When the briefing ended, the room broke into clusters of whispers. Brooks lingered near the table, his posture rigid, his voice barely above a growl. They want her to lead us straight into fire, and we're supposed to salute while she does it. Overheard his chest tightening. She got us home last time, he said quietly. Brooks turned on him, eyes burning. Last time was luck, this time it's suicide. Didn't back down. Or maybe she's the only reason any of us have a chance. Brooks's glare lingered before he shoved past, storming out of the room. Had heard it all, she didn't respond. She didn't need to. Silence was her shield, and tonight it was heavier than ever. She sat alone in the hangar later, helmet resting on her knee, staring at the dark sky through the open doors. The folder still sat unopened on her locker shelf, as though daring her to face what she already knew. She touched the tattoo on her forearm absently, tracing its edges like a scar. Storm Rider. The ghost stirred again, the 5 who never came home, the 2 who vanished. She could almost hear their voices in the hum of the engines being prepped across the hangar. Warnings, memories, echoes she could never silence. The night of the mission came fast. The squadron assembled in silence, eyes darting between her and the officials watching from the shadows. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Colonel Shaw's voice carried over the roar of engines. Storm Flight, this is your fight. Don't just come back alive. Come back with proof that you were here. Climbed into her jet. Her hands moved with automatic precision, every switch and seal checked twice by touch alone. Her heartbeat was steady, but beneath that calm, something coiled tight, waiting. The runway stretched before them like a strip of fire. Engines screamed. One by one, the jets lifted into the night, swallowed by the darkness. The first leg of the mission was quiet, too quiet. Radar clear, skis open. It was almost peaceful, the kind of silence that gnawed at the edges of instinct, knew better than to trust it. Maintain formation, she said over comms. Her voice was calm, unshaken. Altitude steady, vector east by north. His voice came next, tight with nerves. Copy Storm 1. Brooks followed, his tone clipped. Copy. The others checked in. The squadron was locked together, a blade cutting through the sky. The target came into range just as the moon crested above the horizon. The radar station loomed on sensors, its defenses thicker than the briefing had promised. Anti-aircraft batteries ringed the perimeter, their signals lighting up the screens like a storm. Brooks cursed into comms. They didn't tell us half of this. Focus cut him off. The plan was precision. Hit the radar, disable the batteries, and retreat before enemy fighters scrambled. It was the kind of mission that left no room for error. The first strike came clean. Missiles streaked across the night, detonating in bursts of fire. The radar dish shuddered, flames ripping through its structure. But the silence didn't last. Alarms shrieked across their consoles. Enemy fighters scrambled fast, faster than expected. The sky lit up with hostile signals. Contacts incoming 12 o'clock high, shouted. Storm Flight engage, commanded. The air erupted. Flares streaked across black sky. Missiles locked and broke. Jets screamed in impossible arcs. The night became a storm of fire and steel. His breathing spiked, his voice breaking. I'm locked, I can't shake them. Tran break left now, his voice snapped. He obeyed without hesitation, her maneuver dragging him clear of the missile's path by inches. The explosion tore behind him, rocking his jet but leaving it intact. Brooks's voice snarled over comms. I'm boxed, where the hell are you? Hold vector, she ordered. I'm coming. Her jet cut across the night like lightning, diving beneath his attackers, her guns blazing. The escort broke formation, one fighter spiraling into flame. Brooks had an opening. Break right now, she barked. For a moment pride nearly held him frozen, but survival won. He broke right and lived. By the 7th minute the squadron was battered but holding. The radar was gone, the batteries crippled, the enemy scattered but still pressing. Storm Flight regroup, commanded. Her voice carried calm where there was none. We're finished here, homebound. The retreat was brutal. Missiles chased them into the night, anti-air fire clawing at their heels. One jet took a hit, engine crippled, smoke trailing. The pilot's voice screamed through comms. I'm hit, I'm not going to make it. You will, snapped. Kill thrust, glide low, stay on me. Her jet slid beneath his, shielding him from fire, dragging him back into formation by sheer force of presence. The squadron tightened around them, a battered wing pulling itself home. The desert lights rose on the horizon at last. Salvation. Engines howled as jets screamed down onto the runway, tires screeched, metal shuddered, and then silence. They had made it back, all of them. The hangar was heavy with the smell of fuel and fire. Pilots stumbled from their cockpits, sweat dripping, eyes wide. Leaned against his jet, shaking, his chest heaving with disbelief. Brooks stood still, helmet under his arm, face pale. His eyes met across the hangar. There was no mockery left, no arrogance, only the hollow stare of a man who had been saved by someone he once dismissed. Removed her helmet slowly, her expression unchanged. She set it on the wing of her jet, her movements calm, silent. The Pentagon officials stepped forward, their polished boots loud against the steel floor. They didn't smile. They didn't clap. They only observed, their pens ready, their eyes sharp. And knew. This wasn't recognition. This was judgment. The ghost stirred again. She could almost hear them whispering in the hangar, their voices threading through the silence. Storms don't end, they wait. And tonight, the storm was only beginning. What do you do when the people above you fear you more than the enemy? The hangar was quiet in the days after the strike. Too quiet. Jets sat idle, their engines cold, their cockpits sealed shut. The squadron was grounded, at least until Washington decided what to make of them. Pentagon officials roamed like shadows, their polished boots echoing in corridors, their eyes sharp on every passing pilot. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Every glance, every scribbled note said the same thing. We're watching her. We're watching all of you. For most of the recruits, it was unsettling. For Brooks, it was suffocating. He carried himself like a man unraveling, his pride gnawed down to the bone. At first he avoided altogether, eyes fixed anywhere but her direction. But silence didn't ease the sting. Silence made it worse. One night found him in the locker bay, hunched over with his flight tablet smashed against the floor. His fists were clenched, his breathing ragged. She's not supposed to exist, Brooks muttered. His voice shook. Storm Rider, it's a damn myth, and now command is bowing to her like she's the second coming. Hesitated. She saved your life twice. Brooks's head snapped up, eyes burning. She made me need saving. Don't you see it? Every time she flies, we're not proving anything. We're just proving we can't measure up. Didn't reply. He didn't have to, because Brooks's anger wasn't about. It was about himself. Meanwhile, spent her nights in the quiet corners of the base, where shadows bled into silence and ghosts could slip in unnoticed. She sat at the edge of the runway more than once, helmet resting beside her, the desert night pressing cold against her skin. The folder remained unopened in her locker. She didn't need to read it. She carried the weight of every page already, every call sign, every mission, every pilot who never returned. Her hand brushed the tattoo again, tracing the faded ink like a wound that never healed. The winged lightning bolt, the 3 letters, Storm Rider 1. Sometimes she closed her eyes and heard them, the voices of the 6 who had flown beside her. Laughter in the mess hall, silence in briefing rooms, screams swallowed by static. Why me? She whispered once into the dark. Why am I the one left? No answer came. Only the hum of distant engines, the sound of a base that never truly slept. Approached her one night, hesitant, as if afraid to break the silence she carried like armor. He stopped a few steps away, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Ma'am, he said softly. She didn't turn, Tran. He swallowed. I keep thinking about that night, the radar strike. I thought I was dead, but then you were just there, like you'd done it 1,000 times before. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. I had. He blinked. Those missions, the ones no one talks about, you really flew them. She finally turned, her gaze steady on him. Some things are heavier when spoken out loud, better left in silence. He nodded, though he didn't understand. Not fully, but he trusted her, more than he trusted anyone else on base. And that, she realized, was its own kind of weight. The pressure from Washington grew sharper with each passing day. Rumors spread. Some pilots whispered she would be reassigned, others that she'd be grounded permanently. Some thought the Pentagon wanted to bury her name again. Colonel Shaw fought quietly behind closed doors, his voice rising in muffled arguments that leaked through the walls of the command wing. When he emerged, his face was carved in stone. He never explained, never reassured, but the lines on his face deepened each time. One evening, the squadron was called to Hangar 4 again. The air inside was heavy, the kind of silence that prickled against the skin. Shaw stood at the front, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. The Pentagon officials lingered nearby, their expressions unreadable. "This mission," Shaw began, "will test you more than any before." His voice carried like iron. "High-altitude infiltration, deep strike, escorting Allied ground forces through contested airspace. You will be outnumbered, out of time." The room stirred, even Brooks paled. Shaw's gaze swept the squadron before locking on, "And Lieutenant will lead." A murmur rippled through the recruits. Brooks stiffened, his fists clenching, straightened, his eyes fixed on with quiet certainty. Herself didn't flinch. Her face remained calm, her silence unbroken, but inside the storm stirred again. Because she knew what Shaw hadn't said out loud. This mission wasn't just about success. It was about proof. Washington wanted to see if Storm Rider 1 was still what the stories claimed, or if she was nothing more than a myth wearing a faded tattoo. After the briefing, Brooks cornered her in the corridor. His voice was low, sharp with desperation. "They're setting you up," he hissed. "Don't you see it? They don't want you to succeed. They want you to fail so they can bury Storm Rider for good." Met his gaze, unblinking. "Then don't give them what they want." For the first time, his words faltered. He stepped back, his mouth opening then closing again, the fight in him crumbling under her calm. That night stood alone in the hangar, staring at the jets lined in silence. She touched the metal skin of her fighter, the cold steel humming beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes. The ghosts came again, the 5 who never came back, the 2 who disappeared into silence. And she whispered just once, "Guide me." When dawn came, the squadron assembled once more. Engines roared, the sky opened, and the storm was waiting. What happens when the sky itself wants you dead? The morning air over was razor-sharp, the desert horizon still painted in streaks of gray when the order came. Pilots suited up in silence, their helmets tucked tight under their arms, their faces pale. No one joked. No one whispered, not even Brooks. The mission brief replayed in their minds like a warning. Escort ground forces across the border, strike hostile air positions, hold the corridor until the convoy made it through. It wasn't just another test. It was a gauntlet, and everyone knew it. At the far end of the hangar, Pentagon officials watched with folded arms. They didn't speak, but their silence pressed heavier than any words. They weren't here for the mission. They were here for her. Walked with the same deliberate calm as always, helmet cradled beneath one arm, her movements precise, measured. She didn't look at the officials. She didn't need to. She had flown under sharper eyes with heavier ghosts. Colonel Shaw stood at the podium, his voice sharp as steel. "Storm flight, you are the point of the spear. The convoy lives or dies with you. Lieutenant leads. You follow her or you don't come home." He let the words hang. Then softer, almost too low to hear, "Bring them back." Met his eyes, she didn't nod, didn't speak, but Shaw knew. Engines roared. The squadron rolled out onto the runway, 12 fighters lined in perfect formation. Climbed into her cockpit, the familiar weight of the helmet sealing around her head, the world narrowing to the glow of her HUD and the hum of power beneath her. She exhaled once, slow, controlled. The ghost stirred, whispering at the edges of her mind. She tightened her grip on the controls. Not today. Storm flight, this is one. Her voice cut across comms, steady, unshaken. Wheels up in 10. Stay sharp, stay alive. The countdown hit 0. Engines screamed. Jets thundered down the runway and leapt into the sky, swallowed by the horizon. The first stretch was quiet, too quiet. The convoy below rolled through the desert in tight formation, headlights glowing faint against the dust. The sky above was empty, radar clear. For a moment, the illusion of safety hung thin. His voice broke at first, shaky in her headset. "Ma'am, feels wrong, too easy." "You're right," replied, "hold steady." And then the storm hit. Radar lit up like fire. Dozens of hostile signals bloomed across the screen. High altitude, low sweep, a net closing fast. "Contacts incoming, multiple vectors," Brooks shouted. "Storm flight form up," commanded. "Front line break the sweep. Rear line shield the convoy, we hold." The sky erupted. Missiles streaked in, contrails burning white against the dark. Flares burst in desperate blossoms, jets breaking formation as alarms screamed in their ears. The air became chaos. His voice cracked. "I've got 2 on me, I can't." "On your 6, Tran," snapped. Her jet tore across the sky, guns blazing, slicing one escort into flame. "Break right, now." He obeyed without thought. The second fighter overshot, clipped by another volley, gasped for breath, alive by inches. Brooks's voice snarled through the comms. "We're outnumbered, we can't hold this." "You will hold," his tone cut like a blade. "Convoy depends on us, no one breaks." The enemy pressed harder. 10, 15 fighters swarmed, their formation disciplined, their strikes merciless. Anti-air fire from the ground lit the horizon in bursts of flame. One Allied jet took a hit, spiraling down in smoke. The pilot ejected, chute blooming against the chaos. Another screamed as his controls failed, voice cutting to static. His breathing spiked. "We're losing them." "No," said, "we adapt." Her jet flipped into a maneuver that logic, sliding beneath 2 escorts, her vector snapping in a razor-edge arc. Warning screamed across her console. She didn't flinch. The maneuver split the enemy formation open. A gap, a chance. "Brooks, take it," she barked. For a second he froze, pride clashing with instinct, fear with defiance. Then something broke in him. He dove, missiles streaking, his volley tearing through 2 escorts. The gap widened. "Storm flight, push through," commanded. Engines roared. Jets cut into the breach, dragging the convoy with them. Missiles chased, explosions rocked the desert, but the formation held. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat dripped into eyes, hands cramped against throttles, hearts thundered inside. His voice came again, breathless but steady. "Ma'am, we're clear of the first wave, convoy intact." His voice was calm. "Good, stay sharp, storm isn't done." And she was right. The second wave came fast, heavier. Dozens more fighters sweeping from the horizon, a wall of fire closing in. Brooks cursed, "We can't take another." "You can," snapped, "because you must." The sky was a storm now, fire and steel colliding in endless chaos. Jets screamed, missiles detonated, voices shouted and broke across comms. His hands shook against the controls, but her voice cut through the panic every time. "Tran, left vector now. Brooks, cover high. Hold the line, hold." The convoy rolled forward beneath them, crawling through the desert as the squadron bled above to shield it. Minutes became eternity. One by one, enemy fighters fell, spiraling into fire. One by one, Allied jets faltered, crippled but fighting still. At last the horizon shifted. The convoy reached safe ground. Allied anti-air batteries lit up from the far ridge, covering their retreat. The enemy broke. The storm began to thin. "Storm flight homebound," said. Her voice was steady, but inside the ghosts pressed heavier than ever. They limped back across the border, battered, bloodied, but alive. Engines screamed as they hit runway, wheels shrieking against steel. When silence fell, it was heavier than fire. Pilots stumbled from their jets, sweat-soaked, shaking. Pulled off his helmet, his face pale, eyes wide. Brooks stood still, his chest heaving, his pride cracked, but something else in its place now, something almost like respect. Climbed down from her cockpit last. She set her helmet on the wing, her expression unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She only stood, the ghosts whispering still. The Pentagon officials stepped forward, their polished boots loud on the hangar floor. Their faces were unreadable, their pens poised. One of them finally spoke. "Storm Rider 1. The words weren't a question, they were a verdict. Didn't reply. She only traced the tattoo on her arm, the faded ink catching the light. Because storms don't end. They wait. And tonight, the storm had remembered her name. What does it mean to be remembered? The hangar doors stood open to the desert night, the cool wind carrying the smell of jet fuel and dust. The squadron had returned broken, battered, but alive. Every fighter bore scars, scorched paint, cracked panels, smoke-stained fuselages. And yet the convoy was safe. The mission was complete. Inside, silence reigned. No laughter, no bravado, not even the restless chatter that usually followed a fight. Pilots moved like shadows, slow, deliberate, their eyes still wide with the memory of fire. At the center stood. Her helmet rested against her hip, her face unreadable, her silence heavier than any speech. Around her, whispers rippled, Storm Rider 1, but no one dared speak them aloud. Not now, not in her presence. Colonel Shaw entered with the Pentagon officials at his side. His uniform was crisp, his posture iron, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. He stopped at the front of the hangar, his voice sharp as steel. "You held the line," he said. "You brought them through. Every one of you owes your lives not to chance, not to luck, but to the one who led you." His gaze fixed on Storm Rider 1. The officials shifted, their pens poised. One finally spoke, voice clipped and clinical. "The lieutenant's maneuvers exceed current simulation parameters. Her leadership overrides documented chain of command. Recommend reassessment of." Shaw cut him off, his voice cold. "Recommend whatever you want. Out there, she's the reason any of them are standing here. That's the only record that matters." Silence fell again. The officials didn't argue, but their expressions hardened. They hadn't come for recognition. They had come for judgment, and knew it. Afterward, the squadron dispersed slowly, exhaustion written into every step. Brooks lingered near his jet, helmet dangling from his hand. His eyes locked on as she walked past. For once, there was no sneer, no pride. Only something hollow, something almost reverent. He straightened his posture. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. The hangar stilled. Hesitated for a breath, then returned it. Perfect, precise. Was next. His salute snapped into the silence, sharp with respect. One by one, the others followed, salutes rising in unison, the sound of gloves striking arms echoing like thunderclaps. There were no cheers, no shouts, only silence, silence heavier than words. For the first time since she arrived stood not as a probationary pilot, not as a shadow of myth, but as Storm Rider 1. Later, when the hangar was empty and the echoes of boots had faded, remained behind. She sat on the edge of a workbench, the unopened folder resting beside her. Her hand traced the tattoo on her arm, the faded ink catching the dim light. 5 ghosts gone, 2 vanished, 1 left behind. She closed her eyes. For a moment she allowed herself to hear them, the laughter, the silence, the voices swallowed by fire. She breathed once, Not relief, not pride, resolve. Found her there, hesitant in the doorway. He stepped forward, his helmet under his arm, his eyes earnest. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you don't have to carry it all alone." She looked at him, her gaze steady, unreadable. Then, just for a breath, her expression softened. "I do," she said quietly, "but you don't." He nodded, his throat tight, his respect for her heavier than words. When he left, remained. She stood slowly, setting the folder back on the bench without opening it. Some truths didn't need pages. Some truths lived in silence. Outside, the desert night stretched endless. The runway lights burned like stars, guiding her steps. Engines hummed faintly in the distance, preparing for drills, for flights, for storms yet to come. She walked toward her jet, helmet in hand. Tomorrow she would fly again, not for recognition, not for redemption, but for the quiet promise she had made the moment she stepped into the sky, that those who followed would come home and would never forget her name again. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.